Okay, welcome to my home, Kansas City Bourbon and Whiskey Club Facebook group members. Just a few minutes ago, I posted a photo of my super clear cubes, and I thought I'd make another batch and document it for anyone that wants to know at least how I do it. Now, I follow more or less the Chef Alton Brown's method that he featured on his Good Eats Reloaded show earlier this year. And so let's get to it with the devices that I use. First, I use just a little cooler, little Playmate by Igloo is what I have. Alton actually recommends one of those foam straight-sided cooler things that you get if like you order food online or something like that and it ships in dry ice and whatnot. But I don't have one of those, and so this is what I use. Obviously, whatever mold you want. I bought these on Amazon. They were like 2 for $11 or something like that. They come with these lids, and of course, as you'll see later, you don't want to use the lids when you're actually freezing the water. But I suppose they are handy if, you want to keep the funk off your cubes in the freezer. You're going to need a tea towel. I use a cookie sheet, a heating pad, and a rubber mallet, which seems a little odd for ice cubes, but it'll all make sense in a couple days. So let's go ahead and make the ice. Today we're only going to need the mold and the cooler. Okay, so here we have the mold inside the cooler, and of course one of the ingredients I did not mention earlier, hopefully goes without saying, is H2O. Now, Alton of course specifies to use filtered water. We have a reverse osmosis system in our house, so I am using the water out of that spigot. And actually, Alton specifies to use hot water because, believe it or not, hot water freezes quicker than cold water. However, I don't have a hot filtered tap, so cold is what we get. Now, what he says to do is to fill it not only in the mold itself, but also around, so the entire bottom of the cooler is essentially a block of ice. And this way, all of the water freezes around it, and thus, actually I'm going to stop this to get some down in there. You don't want it to float, by the way. But it forces it to freeze upwards, which of course is how you get it so clear. So that's pretty much all I want in there. And now we go to the freezer. Another optional ingredient is very cute puppies, but if you don't have that, you can still make clear ice. To the freezer! Okay, we are in my garage freezer, and you'll see I have the cooler set in there. Very important to leave the top of the cooler, if your cooler has a top, leave that open, because again, you're wanting the heat to escape straight up. You'll also notice that I have the mold basically centered in the water in the bottom of the cooler, and again, that's so the two sides have equal, I know I left you open, equal space to freeze. So 48 hours is the minimum amount of time that I use to properly freeze. So we will see you in 2 days. Cheers. Okay, so here we are, actually 3 days later, because yesterday I didn't have time to do this, but we're going to harvest the ice. An optional step that I take here is to heat up a heating bag. This is just a little heating pad that's full of sand that we microwave for 90 seconds, and it becomes a nice little heating utensil. So, all right, then it's time to harvest the ice. Now, this has been sitting out for an hour and 15 minutes. It's still pretty much solid. I could obviously let it sit a little bit longer to try to unthaw and make it easier to get out of the cooler, but that is what the persuader is for. So what I'm going to do is tap all the sides and the bottom. Not too hard because you don't want to break everything, but voila. So I usually break apart all the excess here. You can even see how clear that is. And we make use of the tea towel. Dump them on the tea towel here. Now you'll notice the tops, which is actually the bottom of the ice cubes, are still cloudy. And that's where the heating pad and the cookie sheet are going to come in. On Alton's video, he just says rub a cookie sheet over the top of them and the friction itself will, melt off the cloudy parts. I found, however, that takes way too long, and thus I invented the heating pad idea. So, heating pad's ready. On top, voila. Sometimes I have to put in the heating pad for another 30 seconds or so. And this doesn't take long. The ice cubes are invariably a little bit different sized depending on, how the mold was sitting in the cooler and how the cooler was sitting in the freezer. So the water levels differs a little bit. So after a little bit, I'll kind of look. Like you'll notice the middle four are actually pretty well melted, where the outer four still has a little bit of frost on. So that's when I'll remove these and then just do the rest of them. Obviously you want to use a clean tea towel, no funk. You might think, oh, I'm melting all the ice. This ice is rock hard, and you're taking off a really minimal amount when you do this. Looks pretty damn good. All right, so here we are. Pretty clear ice cubes. These are pretty big, as you can see. I got a pretty big paw, so fits nicely in any size rocks glass. I use the double rocks size, and that is how I make super clear ice cubes. Finally, I just want to make mention, I saw a lot of, unitasker devices that people had posted as how they do theirs. Those are great, if you want to spend, 35 to 50 bucks on a thing that you can only use one way. Since this is the Alton Brown ice making method, I think it makes sense just to mention how abhorrent he is of all unitasker kitchen devices. So I literally spent nothing except for the 11 bucks on the mold. Already had the cooler, already had everything else, And those devices I saw make 4 ice cubes at a time, whereas this makes 8. So double your output in an absolute fraction of the money. Hope you enjoyed it, and cheers, everybody. We'll see you next time. Welcome back. I realized I forgot to mention one thing earlier, and that is after you've harvested your ice cubes and melted off the cloudy parts, it's best to store them in just a Ziploc bag in your freezer. So that's what I've done. This is actually a couple of older batches. I try to rotate them. Use the oldest stuff first so nothing gets too old. And what you're going to notice here is that after you, sometimes they stick together. After you have stored them for a while, they do look a little cloudy, but that's just the condensation that's formed around them. Once you get them in your whiskey, that all goes away. So I like to drink the higher proof stuff with big ice. So we're going to use the 1792 full proof single batch from Brown Bag Liquor. Shout out to my homies. That is where I work part-time thanks to the pandemic and the symphony being shut down for all practical purposes. So pour. Be healthy with it. It'll crack sometimes it'll remain perfectly warm, but either way, cheers to Alton Brown's super clear ice cubes.